Growing up, a Pakistani Muslim in Georgia, I never really had many friends who looked like me or seemed to understand how my culture and religion impacted my upbringing. However, over time, I've come to realize that these differences have made me cherish these aspects of myself even more. And in my preschool and elementary school years, from classmates and strangers alike, I would receive comments ranging from, "Oh, I didn't see you in the National Spelling Bee this year," all the way to "Muslims kill white people." And some of these comments had no malicious intent and were completely harmless. However, they all had an isolating and shameful effect on a younger me. And I never really directly thought that I was different from my friends. My implicit conformity, or subconsciously adapting myself to be more like others, showed in different ways. When teachers would ask what everyone got from Santa, I'd list what I wanted for my birthday the following month instead. I started calling my father Dad because nobody else said Baba, which is the word for father in Urdu. And I hesitated when introducing my mother to my friends because I feared them judging her accent. And I am sorry for my previous shame about my upbringing, but now this is something that I am confident in. And part of this confidence came from a surprising source, which is martial arts. And my uncle previously taught and practiced martial arts, specifically Taekwondo, and he introduced me to it and made it look so effortlessly invigorating that when I was around 5 years old, I decided to try it out for the first time. And on my way home from my very first karate class, I was bouncing up and down in the car with stars in my eyes, and everything else that I had ever tried faded into the back of my mind, never to be seen again, as I now knew what I wanted to pursue. And all of my previous subconscious fears of not being like everyone else never arose when I was in the studio. However, there were still many other struggles I had to overcome in martial arts, such as board breaking. And in karate, everyone first learned how to break a board using a sliding side kick, which is essentially just sliding your legs together, picking up your front leg, and extending it out to the side. This was a requirement for belt testing, and the first belt one could earn was the white belt. And I had seen my instructors do the class before for weeks as a demonstration for us, so I thought I was ready, but when the time for my big moment came and my first ever belt test, I was petrified. My knees refused to cease bouncing, I was starting to pale, and my palms were clammy with sweat. The fact that this was really wood started to dawn on me, and I started thinking, I can't do this. I'm gonna get a splinter, or worse, I'm going to slice my foot open and need stitches. So that and many other worst case scenarios were running through my mind within the few seconds I had before the kick, and then, much to my alarm, I actually had to try and break the board. And instead of blasting through it like I was told to, and as a result, the satisfying crack that echoes through a studio once a board breaks, never occurred when I tried. The sound that my board emitted was more like a kitten tapping on a door. Due to my panic, I naturally did not break it, and I kept repetitively hitting the board over and over and over again to what I believed was the best of my ability to break it, but soon enough, I had to sit back down and wait for a chance to try again in order to bring other kids a turn. And by nature, I'm a very stubborn person, and not always in a good way, so I was sitting crisscross applesauce on the mat, absolutely fuming due to my misfortune. And when it was time for me to go back up, I started thinking, why would I put myself through all that training, all those classes, just to neglect what I've learned because of a splinter? And feeling rejuvenated after my new change of heart, I did eventually break the board. It took a few tries, a lot of effort, and a few tears as well, but it was worth my new white belt in the end. And the next major tussle I had with martial arts was with nunchucks. At this point, I had long since made the switch to Taekwondo, which is different from martial arts because the forms aren't as oriented on punches and the stances aren't as deep. I was only a few tests away from my black belt, which meant that part of my curriculum for a cycle was learning the basics of black belt nunchucks. And when I had picked them up from the first time and I started swinging, I hit myself in the head, which became a recurring theme over the next few months. And later, when I still had to learn a more complex nunchuck form, I was still the slowest and sloppiest to finish, which made me extremely upset that I still wasn't able to do as well as I was expecting. And I actually have them here today, so I'll show you guys a few things about them. And this was one of the first things I learned how to do. So just a single strike. So you start out here, and then you're just extending it out like that. And then the first time, I missed it under the arm, hit myself in the head. It's very painful. And then I had to learn again, but this time I had to do a figure 8 as well. So for that, it goes like this, but mine looked more like that. And eventually, I did get it though, and then the most complicated one for me was out of the basics. This is the 6th and the last basic you had to learn, and it's a mixture. You put all of the components you learned in the basics together. So it looks like this, but mine looked more like, and that's where I hit myself in the head again. And one of my instructors in Taekwondo, he actually told me the origin story of black belts in Taekwondo. And as the story goes, everybody initially starts out with a white belt, which is the lowest of the ranks, as previously mentioned. And then over time, through toil and hard work, strenuous labor, the belt eventually gets darker and darker and darker, showing how the person hasn't given up when faced with these struggles. Which reminds me of my own family and my own heritage, whose lives were uprooted during India and Pakistan's partition, and for some, coming to this country alone with absolutely nothing in the hopes to bring a better life for their future families. And the belt that was once white turned completely black from the toil and was seen as a tremendous honor, just as I am honored to have such a courageous and resilient family who put in the work to get me to where I am today. And in addition to nunchucks and board breaking, this next struggle within martial arts concerned my wounded pride. So at this point, I was still on Taekwondo. I was a blue belt, so it was a few ranks higher than my white belt, but I was still far from the experience of a black belt. And I never felt different for participating in a typically male-dominated sport like Taekwondo, because I had many positive role models at my studio, older girls and women who were able to provide a good example for me. And when I got to my first tournament, I noticed that all of the other children in my division were bigger, taller, black belt boys. I was very afraid that I was about to get beaten up. But then I wasn't oblivious to all the glances I was getting from both spectators and the other competitors alike, since I was smaller and I was the only girl, so nobody expected me to win. But in Taekwondo, sparring, which is, for those of you who don't know, essentially when we just put on all our gear and we start fighting each other. Now, that has always been my favorite part of the sport. And in class, I have had my fair share of getting beaten up and pushed around by the older kids, especially by the boys, which over time has given me confidence and also knowledge of what to do if you are facing a bigger, stronger, taller, etc. opponent. And over time, that practice did help me win gold in my division. So to anyone else who feels insecure or isolated because they aren't the same as everyone else, just know that you are not alone. There are many others who have been in or are currently in your situation, or a situation similar to yours, myself included. And it's all important that we have positive role models and people that we can look up to provide inspiration for ourselves, whether you know the person personally or not. And for example, my greatest role model is my mother. Heritage is something that makes us unique, but also brings us together. And I am very grateful to have such a beautiful one that I can love and share. And rather than attacking someone for being different or for genuinely not knowing something, take the time to further educate yourself or to educate someone else. And I am no Daniel LaRusso, but I will be showing you guys one form that I learned when I was a green belt in Taekwondo. So a few belts lower than the blue belt from my tournament, but once again, I had decent experience, so I'll show you guys that real quickly. Thank you. This is Meri Kahani, or in English, my story. And thank you all for taking the time to listen to me share it today.